Hi, everybody. Welcome to Bill Whittle Live. I'm Bill Whittle, live apparently, here in beautiful Sherman Oaks, California. And today is Thursday, the 23rd of March. One topic for the show today, and it's a pretty simple one, really. It's called The BBC Will Kill Us All. And we'll explain what all that means in just a moment. Push the button, Neil. Just a quick note before we get started today. We're going to be making some changes to the show, and I think what we'll probably do it's a bit too much like the Stratosphere Lounge right now. I think so. I think what we're going to do, hopefully starting next week, is we're going to do it more of an interview show. We had a lot of success doing the interviews when I was on NRA TV hosting for Grant Stinchfield for 5 days. And I thought that went really well. So hopefully what we'll be able to do is get guests in here and make that half hour a little more different, a little more lively and interesting. So that's probably coming up, if not next week, then the week after. We may need a little time to readjust, but in any event, that's where we're going with this one, I think. And so now on to our story, our only story for the day. And again, this whole episode is brought to you by the compassion and kindness of the people who are paying for it, which is the members at BillWhittle.com. Okay. The BBC will kill us all. What does that mean? Well, I'll tell you what it means. We're all reading about the attack in London, the terror attack in London, which the BBC was covering, and I get BBC on my satellite radio in my car, which means I get to listen to it for about 6 or 7 minutes because I have a nice short commute. Anyway, here's the situation. They're wrapping their report about the terrorist attack in London. And just parenthetically, they say that there was another attack in Belgium. And this is almost a direct quote. It's something almost exactly like this. So that's why I decided to just run in here and talk about this. So the BBC says there appears to have been another attempt of a driving killing where somebody plows a car into people in Belgium. The suspect has been arrested. His name is Mohammed R. And at the moment, his motives are not clear. Did you get that? Mohammed R. is stopped, about to plow into a crowd full of people, and as it turns out in the story, he's got camo fatigues in the back, and he's got a big can of gas, he's got a couple knives. Mohammed R. plows into a group of people, or tries to. They get out of the way is basically what happened, and we find out that the motive is at the moment unclear. See, this is the point I'm going to be making today, and this is the only point I'm going to be making today. The problem is not Muslim immigration, and the problem is not even Muslim terrorism, Islamic terrorism. The problem is these people, and I'm going to just label them as the BBC because that's the voice of it, this Tony superior, just kind of condescending kind of, we can't tell you savages the truth because God knows you just start rampaging through the streets and murdering innocent people. That's what's going to kill us all. That's what's going to kill us all. If the West falls, the thing that we will hear last will be, this is your BBC overseas service. That will be the voice that we hear. So, look, how does this work? It's clear to me that this is a death wish on the part of liberal elites. And I know that sounds like a strange thing to say, that this is a suicide cult, but that's pretty much what it is. The suicide cult is not just the Islamic terrorists. The suicide cult are the people in places like the BBC and CNN and other places like this who will not come to grips with the problem that we're facing. And that's the problem that we're facing. We could solve this terrorism problem very quickly. We could find a way to resolve the immigration situation pretty quickly. But what we will not be able to do is find a way to defeat this suicidal death cult that is the BBC. Right? It's just that simple. They are determined. They will take this to the grave. There could be a terror attack in London that knocks down Big Ben, and it falls over, and I don't know the geography, but let's say it also knocks over the big London Eye Ferris wheel and all the rest of it, and the whole thing is in flames. And you would have reports of people driving up in vans or something packed with explosives screaming Allahu Akbar, and it's all gone and thousands of people killed. And the BBC will say that the motives are not clear. At this time, same way that the government of Sweden says that yes, well, we've had a number of increase in rapes, but they were all committed by Swedes. They were committed by people who you have just naturalized as Swedes 3 weeks ago. They were committed by native Swedes. They were all committed, all of them committed by immigrants from these North African countries and these other Muslim countries in the Middle East. All of them. And they refuse to say it. And because they refuse to say it, they are burning capital. Now, these people have gotten in. Look, the BBC at one point had a fair amount of credibility to it. As a matter of fact, I'm old enough to remember a point when you could hear the British, the tone, on the radio. This is the BBC. It's 0400 GMT, and this is the news. And you'd get the news. But that's not what it is anymore. By the way, just to give you an idea of the BBC's political correctness, and this may open me up to a little bit of criticism, but I don't care. If you listen to the BBC today, 2 out of 3 of their on-air announcers on the radio have speech impediments. One of them has the most terrible lisp I've ever heard on the radio. So you would ask yourself, well, why would their newsreaders have speech impediments if they're reading the news on the radio? And the answer is, what is your ability to listen to our message with clarity compared to our ability to signal how virtuous we are by hiring people who, because of some natural handicap, are not able to do the job? Can't you understand how morally superior we are by hiring on-radio commentators with speech impediments? Don't you see how moral that makes us? It's like hiring, it's putting together a basketball team committed, filled with people who have, maybe some kind of a spinal problem or something. It's like, here we are, we're producing this product, and we're going to purposely show you what incredibly deep and loving and moral people we are by putting these people into positions on the air. It's, why not have a first baseman who's got, one arm? You can catch, and then he can just throw the glove off and then throw it. Now, I'm not making fun of disabled people. I'm doing just the exact opposite of making fun of disabled people. On the contrary, what I'm saying in cases like this with these progressives is they are parading disabled people to show other white, rich liberals how incredibly advanced they are. They're tokens. It's just that simple. They're tokens because they wouldn't be there otherwise. They're tokens, and it's the worst kind of condescension. It's the worst kind of it's just everything you need to know, right? So when I talk about the BBC, as I said, I'm talking about the governments of Sweden and France and Germany, and I'm talking about the CNN here in America. I'm talking about Barack Obama, who in 8 years could never say the words Islamic terrorism in the same sentence. And every time there was a terror attack, the president would say, well, the former president, we shouldn't jump to conclusions. The motives are unclear. Really? The guy's screaming Allahu Akbar and he's gunning people down and his motives are unclear? Those are unclear motives to you? They're not unclear to me. Okay? They're not unclear to me. They're crystal clear to me. Mohammed R. Plows through a group of people in Belgium a few hours ago, and people managed to jump out of the way, and his motives for the attack are unclear, says the BBC. Well, they may be unclear to the BBC, but they're clear to me. And I suspect they're clear to many people who voted to get Great Britain out of the EU. And I suspect that they're very, very clear to the people who voted for Donald Trump. And I suspect that the French people are going to surprise some of these elitist swine. And because it's going to be clear to them too. So if you assume that the BBC or CNN is an organization and a product, because they're a business, right? They're a business, they're a for-profit business. Well, at least the CNN supposedly is. BBC is paid for by the British people. So the British people are paying for the destruction of Britain through the bias and the unremitting progressive death wish that the BBC has. So, but let's take CNN for an example. You are a for-profit business. Your ABC News, your CBS News, your CNN, your Fox, your MSNBC, whatever. Well, MSNBC, of course, was designed to take a large fortune and make it into a small fortune. But putting that aside, so CNN, let's say, what is it that CNN is selling? Are they selling news? Not really. You can get news from a lot of different places. You can get news from the Des Moines Register, or whatever. And I don't mean to disparage Des Moines. Des Moines is a lovely place. You can get news from the AM radio. You can get news wherever you want to. But presumably, what CNN was selling is clear. They don't sell this anymore, and they have no one to blame but themselves for this. But what they were selling was not news. Their product is credibility. It's credibility. It's believability. Walter Cronkite was the most trusted man in America, and nobody knew at the time. I bet not 100 people knew that Walter Cronkite, for his entire adult life, was a globalist who believed in one world government. He said, "Look, I'm not making this up. I've got video. There is video of Walter Cronkite accepting an award for his work towards one world government." And in that video, Walter Cronkite, the most trusted man in America, says that essentially it's going to be hard for us in America, but we have to get used to the fact that the United States is essentially just going to be a postal address from now on. It's not going to be the United States as we understand. It's not going to be a country. It's not going to be a room full of freedom. It's just a postal address in a giant world government that will see that everything is fine. And since we have one world government and all the people in the world are in it, then there won't be any wars anymore. And this man said that Vietnam is unwinnable, and that's when the U.S. Population swung so heavily against the war, because Walter Cronkite said we couldn't win it. Nobody knew that Walter Cronkite was a one-world nationalist. He's a lunatic. He's a lunatic. The thing, just as a brief divergence here, because it's not that much of a divergence, what the BBC is pushing, what Walter Cronkite is pushing, what CNN wants, what Barack Obama wants, what Nancy Pelosi wants, what all the progressives want, is they want one world government because it's even more powerful. It's more powerful than what they already have. And here's the fallacy with the one world government idea. Whenever you listen to a liberal or progressive talking about one world government and globalism, not free trade, I'm talking about globalism politically, whenever you hear them talking about it, if you ask them about what this looks like, it looks exactly like the European Union. And the thing that they can't get through their heads because they're too stupid is other cultures don't want to be like us. It's not a misunderstanding, and it's not a door that we've locked and we won't let them in. Every single time they talk about one world government, they always talk about it as it's the kind of thing that's run at the Oxford faculty lounge. A bunch of very, very smart people who not elected, of course, because that would mean they'd have to appeal to the savages out there. They'll self-select, don't worry, and we'll just get the smartest people, nothing to worry about. And they're just going to sit around and they're going to make decisions, enlightened decisions on where the money should go and whose economy should be doing what, and we're going to adjudicate any kind of a conflict, and that'll solve all the problems. All the world will be gone. They always talk about it like that. That's the structure. They think it's going to be like Brussels. They think that the one world government, and I'm not talking about the conspiracy one world government, I'm talking about the world they're trying to get us to, will probably be housed in The Hague, and people will go there and they'll sip their Belgian coffee, and then they'll go and they'll control the rest of the world. But what they never ever seem to think is, what if the one world government is the Islamic Caliphate? What if that's the one world government? Because that's what they're trying to do. There's no question that's what they're trying to do. If they weren't so backwards and Stone Age savages, we'd have something to worry about. But that's what they want. So why is it that these progressives always assume that if there's going to be a one world government, it's going to be the one world government set up exactly the way that they want it? What about the other 6-7 billion people out there? They've got a say in this too. What makes you think BBC and CNN and all the rest, and Barack Obama, what makes you think that 7 billion people, each with their own cultures, which predate ours in most cases by thousands of years, what makes you think that China, with 5,000 years of history, is going to say, yes, well, it's much, much better that we give up our Chinese nationalism and our language and our culture in order to sit in a room in Belgium and have a one world government? Why would they do that? Why? You want to bend America to this idea of a bigger government, something above national sovereignty. But you think that you're just going to bend it to, you want to run the world out of a hot tub sipping Chardonnay, BBC, CNN, governments of Sweden. Sweden's got the first all feminist government. I think they've got a feminist prime minister, feminist defense minister, feminist, all the rest of this stuff. You know why? You know why Sweden has a feminist defense minister? Because we pay for the defense of Sweden. That's why. Because it is 15,000 Russian tanks just on the other side of that narrow little Baltic Sea there. And they're not deterred by the 40 or 100 tanks that the Swedes have. They're deterred by the American armed forces stationed in Europe. So who they can afford to be this stupid for a little while longer. But back to the credibility issue. News organizations like CNN were so in the tank for Hillary Clinton. Oh, somehow the CNN debate, the question leaked out. Really? Yeah. Who did it leak out to? Oh, it happened. I guess it leaked out to Donna Brazil. What an unfortunate coincidence that Donna Brazil, or Brazil, got one of the advanced questions on the debate. You know, Donald Trump made a very, very good point about this, and I've never heard this point made before. It's really, really good point. Donald Trump said, okay, well, if it's not Hillary's fault, then how come when she was given the question in advance, why didn't Hillary Clinton say, wait a minute, that's completely unethical. You can't give me a question in advance. That's not fair. That's not how it works. How dare you do this? I'm going to call CNN right now and say that this has happened, and we need to take that question off the board, and they need to do something about their leaks. But that's not what she did, is it? That's not what she did. So we have this death cult that sits over our heads and tries to tell us how to do everything and how to surrender everything. We've got an organization here in America. We've got an entire political party in America dedicated to the idea that we have to give up our national sovereignty in order to comply with environmental regulations or to comply with political regulations, or in order so that the people in European cafes will like us and not be embarrassed when they go overseas to the Cannes Film Festival. They won't have to be embarrassed because they're Americans anymore, because we will surrender the idea of being Americans and we'll all be one big happy family. It doesn't work that way. It just doesn't work that way. And they can't figure it out. So this is the fight that we have to fight. The fight for Western civilization is not against Muslim terrorism. We could solve this problem very quickly, if we were serious about it. If we were serious about it, we could solve it very quickly, and it would not entail going and bombing the living daylights out of hundreds of thousands or millions of people, most of whom or many of whom are innocent. We wouldn't have to do that at all. If we were serious about ending Islamic terrorism, we have, as always, history provides us with a laboratory. And a laboratory is a place where you can test a theory and find out whether or not it's true. And history gives us a laboratory on how to deal with these kind of Muslim terrorists. And the laboratory goes back a little over 100 years, back to the Philippines, where there was an uprising of Muslims called the Moros. And one of the few genuine atrocities that America has committed institutionally, I think, back during the Spanish-American War, shortly thereafter, I think, where there were something like 800 of these Moros in a giant, like a crater, and we basically just surrounded them and just shot them all to death. Mark Twain wasn't happy about that. Doesn't sound good to me either, but let's get to the point. We're fighting an ongoing insurgency in the Philippines where Muslim insurgency, basically. And they're doing really well. They're winning. And finally, Blackjack Pershing, who 10, 12 years later is going to go to World War I and win some fame over there as commander of American forces, is assigned to this problem. And Pershing looks at the problem and all these assaults and ambushes of American troops and all of these low-level killings and suicide attacks and all the rest of it. And Blackjack Pershing looks at this and he understands the religion enough to have at least read the religion. And so what Pershing does is, he has a bunch of people that are killed in a battle. There's like some kind of serious firefight, and the Americans win with their superior firepower. And there's a couple of prisoners taken, and there's a lot of enemy dead. And what Pershing did was he took dug a giant ditch. He threw the enemy dead soldiers in there, and he threw in a large number of pig carcasses as well. And he let the prisoners who he'd captured go. He said, no, go on, off you go. And they went back and told their people what they saw, and that was the end of the insurgency. It was over, just like that. Like that. Why? Well, I'm sure liberals can't figure this out. But let me explain it to you. If you don't understand the enemy, if you don't understand the people who are trying to kill you, then you will not succeed in terms of beating them. Every enemy is different, and every enemy has a weakness, and they have strengths, and we have to look at what those things are and be prepared to deal with them on our terms, not on their terms. As it turns out, that 100 years ago, 120, somewhere in that vicinity, I think I just mispronounced sovereignty all the time. Is it sovereignty? Who cares? I don't care. Sovereignty? I don't care. In any event, we have to understand what Blackjack Pershing understood is who is it we're fighting and what are their weaknesses? What are they? Well, in the case of this Muslim insurgency 100 years ago or so, the weakness was that their strength was that they're suicide bombers. The strength of the Moros in the Philippines was that they were so committed to their cause and their religion that they were willing to die for their religion and had no compunctions about this at all. The suicide bomber, with the suicide vest, but the suicide bomber in general, is a poor person's guided missile. It's a poor cause. If you've got this asymmetrical warfare, you've got this gigantic, huge, powerful Western structure and a much smaller, much smaller, much weaker insurgency force or counterforce, whatever you want to call it, they'll go to terrorism because terrorism magnifies itself. You kill 3,000 Americans on 9/11, but you kill a part of every one of the 300 million Americans. You kill a part of all of it. So its reach is much bigger. So you've got people who are willing to die. That's their strength. They are willing to become guided missiles, human guided missiles, to take explosive ordnance into the place where it will do the most damage against innocent civilian lives. And they'll try and scare us into doing what they want us to do. That's their strength. Their weakness is that they do it out of a strong religious belief, an overwhelming religious belief. Just like the kamikaze suicide pilots in World War II and the Japanese, they believed so ardently in their cause that they were willing to line up and lay down their lives for it, knowing full well they're not coming back from these missions, the suicide bombing mission or the 9/11 mission or the kamikaze attack mission. They know they're not coming back. They're so fanatical. They're so fanatical that they are willing to die for it. Now, why are they so fanatical? In the case of the Moros and in the case of the situation we have today, they're willing to die for their religion because they have been told since they were able to understand their language that if you die in battle, especially if you die in battle against the Westerners, against the infidels, then you will immediately get an express ticket. You get to cut the line and go straight to paradise, and all of the things that their society denies them on the earth, women, music, wine, gambling, fun, music, all of those things that they're not allowed to enjoy on the earth will become theirs all in an instant if you are willing to be brave enough to make the sacrifice, you see. And if you are a hopeless person, or if you're a sort of a strange kind of an educated self-loathing person, that is almost overwhelming motivation. So what do you do when you have people who are ready to kill themselves for their religion, killing you and kill themselves for their religion? You look at the religion is what you do. You look at the religion. And one of the great weaknesses of our enemy is they are convinced that if they die in battle, they will go to heaven, asterisk. That's it. Die as jihadi warriors and go to paradise, asterisk. And the asterisk says that no pork products will ever be allowed in heaven. If you are contaminated by pork, you can't get in. This is what they believe. And they believe that aspect of their religion just as much as they believe in the paradise aspect of their religion. So what Pershing figured out, and what we would do tomorrow if we were serious about this problem, is very simple. Pershing basically said, any one of you Muslims who are killed in battle are going to be buried with pigs, and if we do that to you, you will not go to paradise. Your ticket's been canceled. And in one stroke, like that, in one stroke, Pershing removed the motivation of the entire insurgency, and it was over. He said, no. You're not going to heaven. I know you think you are, and I know you're going to die for it. But look, hey, I didn't write your Quran, you did. But I'm going to use the asterisks here, and I'm going to say that no, if you attack Westerners and die in battle, we're going to bury you with pig parts, and you're not going to heaven. You're just going to stay in the earth and rot with the pigs. And when you have these people realize that, wait a minute, he's serious, and we will in fact stay in the ground and rot with the pig carcasses, all of a sudden the motivation to blow yourself up or to drive through a crowd of people and get shot in the process goes way, 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 way down. Way, 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 way down. Because you've taken away their motivation. Completely taken away their motivation. Sold. Done. Finished. Now, what's especially disturbing about the BBC and the people like the BBC is this. They are, either through their death wish or for whatever reason, it doesn't really matter what the reason is. However, the BBC is determined, and CNN as well, and Barack Obama and all the rest, they are determined to do the same thing to the West that Pershing did to the Muslim insurgents with the Moros in the Philippines. In other words, the BBC is dedicated to the idea of removing the motivation of the British people, not of the Muslims. They're dedicated to the eradication of the motivation to fight for the West. And the same thing here with the progressives in the United States. Their primary mission is to make sure that those of us who are willing to fight and die for this country and the ideals that it believes in, and those of us who are dedicated to these ideals, the job of the progressives is to destroy our motivation. And what are we fighting for? They can do the same math that we could. We know how to defeat these Islamic terrorists. We're very simple. We just deny them their ticket to heaven. How do you defeat the Americans who are willing to do what we've always done and go overseas and face the kamikazes or face the Nazis or face whoever? How do you destroy our motivation? Well, what are we motivated by? What is it that we're fighting for? What sends American troops into battle? What makes Americans enlist in the military? What is it? Well, people in this country enlist in the military and are ready to give their lives because they believe in America. They believe in the American ideal. They believe in the idea of private property and American home ownership. They believe in the American dream. They believe that this country fights for freedom and not for tyranny. They believe that America is a force for good in the world and not a force for evil. They believe that American peace and American methods and American prosperity can be applied to anybody if they want it, but mostly they're fighting to preserve this bubble around this country, this force field that makes the inside of America Disneyland compared to the outside of America. The progressives are not too stupid to see this. They understand that everything that we're fighting for, that we've traditionally fought for, has got to be destroyed. So how do you destroy it? Well, you basically simply filter every single event, both in the present and in the past. You filter it through a progressive filter so that only the bad can go through and all of the good is kept away. So when you look at American history, what is American history? Is it a revolution of rich men who are ready to hang for the idea of freedom for poor men? No, that's not the American Revolution. The American Revolution, as you well know, is the story of slaveholders determined to hold on to their slaves. Thomas Jefferson was not a guy who basically almost single-handedly invented the idea of personal liberty, and Hamilton and Madison and Adams and all the rest weren't the kind of people who figured out that in order to protect yourself from freedom, you needed to protect yourself from people who wanted to take away your freedom, namely the government. Did they get credit for that? No. Only the bad comes through. What else is there in American history? Well, there's slavery, of course, and the only other thing I guess that happened in American history is we slaughtered the Indians by giving them blankets that were infected with smallpox. We used biological weapons against the American Indians, you see, and that means that we're just no better than the Nazis, obviously. We're just genocidal lunatics, and we're using biological warfare weapons of mass destruction by sending Indians blankets that are infected with smallpox. I might point out that we did this amazing thing about 100 years before germ theory was developed. In other words, we use these so-called smallpox biological weapons and the introduction of disease to Indian populations on purpose about 100 years before we figured out how diseases are transmitted. So that's kind of interesting, isn't it? and all the rest of our society. And the only thing that they'll talk about in any way that's positive about American society, the left, is they'll talk about the protesters. They'll talk about the people who are in the streets. They'll talk about the idea that some people are willing to go out into the streets and put their fists up and stop the corporate death machine. But that's all they talk about. And if that's all you hear, it may not affect you. You grew up, as I grew up, we grew up in an America that's worth fighting for. I just finished reading The Old Breed, story of a man named E.B. Sledge on Peleliu and Okinawa. It's horrifying. But the Marines, who are facing, I think, conditions that have never been seen before or since, basically said, if the country's good enough to live in, it's good enough to fight for. Pretty simple. It works for me. So we have to make sure that the country's not good enough to live in. That's the job of the CNN, it's the job of the BBC and everything else. The job of the BBC is to make the British people understand that the country's not worth fighting for, and that its culture is not worth fighting for. So all you hear about the BBC is you hear about the horrors of Victorian British imperialism. And look, British imperialism was a pretty big pill to swallow. You don't find anything like it in American history, with the possible exception of the Philippines for a couple of years. So that's all you hear about. The Victorians massacred these Indian people, and East Indian people, and the Victorians did this, and the Victorians did that, and they so on and so forth. And look, it's true they did massacre Indian people, and it is true that that is an absolute atrocity, and all the rest of it. It's not denying that that's true. I don't want to deny it's true. The strength of the West is our ability to examine ourselves openly and criticize what we've done wrong and be willing to face the consequences of our errors and own up to them. But in addition, the British in India did a couple of other things. For instance, they abolished the practice of suttee. Now, I don't know how many people were killed in that massacre. It was hundreds, and I'm not excusing the massacre. What I am saying is, all you hear about is the massacre, and you don't hear about the fact that British law basically came in and said, prior to this, if a man died, especially if he was a man of some importance, his wife or wives were bound by culture to throw themselves into the fire, into the funeral pyre. You got a guy, he's married, maybe he's got a bunch of wives. To be honest with you, I don't know if it's true of multiple wives. I just don't know the answer to that. But in any event, his wife for sure is expected in Hindu culture prior to the British arrival. Every time a man dies, the wife, who's going to outlive him 95 out of 100 times, right, must cast herself alive into the flames as a show of grievances, and so that he knows that she's not going to go out and have fun when he's gone. That's called suttee. And the British got to India and they said, no, this is barbaric and you're going to stop that. And one of these leaders of the Indian culture, the Indian population, went up to a British general and said, no, you don't understand. This is our culture. These are our customs. And the British general said to him, okay, that may be your custom. Our custom is to find people who murder women and hang them by the neck until they're dead. So you have your customs, we'll have our customs. That was the end of suttee. How many people did that save? How many lives did that save? How many lives did basic sanitation save? How many lives did the introduction of electricity save? How many lives were improved by the fact that the British would not allow the caste system of untouchables to survive? They legally did not allow something like 200 million people who were in this bottom caste of the untouchables. They said, no, this is wrong. Prior to the arrival of the British, these people didn't even live as slaves. Slavery would be a step up for them. They were slaves, but they were slaves you couldn't even look at. You weren't even, forget talking to them. If you were in the same room as them, if they were walking on the side of the street, they had to cross to the other side. This basically went away. So all of the good things are filtered out. All of the bad things are amplified. And over the course of the last 40 or 50 years, the BBC, again, representative of all the rest of these liberal, progressive death cults, has destroyed or tried to destroy the motivation for keeping the West alive. And just to wrap it up, the pig blood situation is a perfect example of this. A perfect example of this. If we wanted to stop suicide attacks, We would simply make sure, first of all, when we were fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan, we should have made it crystal clear. We should have made it absolutely clear, taken some captives, and shown them that every single bullet that we fire, we basically rub with bacon grease. That's how we lubricate our guns, bacon grease. And then go back and tell people that. And we should have done it. And we should have done the same thing with the bodies. Any suicide bomber that is killed, you just throw them in a pit with a couple of pig carcasses, and you televise it, and you show it to them and the rest of the world, and it will stop the problem. But think about that. Could you do that today? If you tried to do that, what would people say? What would the media say if you did that? They would say that you've committed a crime far greater than murdering 3,000 people. You've insulted somebody's culture. You've used their religion disrespectfully. And far, far better that America have 3,000 people burned and crushed to death in towers than for us to do something that tacky. Right? That's it. Tacky. Embarrassing. If we're serious about the West, and we will be someday, because the BBC is going to continue this, and so are the progressives, and it's going to give the people who are trying to kill us more and more motivation, more and more of a sense that we deserve to die, more and more of a sense that we didn't earn, or certainly don't earn, what we have. And so as they continue to erode the Western values, it makes attacks more and more likely, because these people make the same miscalculation that they always make. That freedom-loving people in a democracy are weak and lazy and fat and stupid, and all you have to do is just give them a little push, and it's all yours. The whole thing. The beautiful farms are yours, and the buildings are yours, and the cell phones are yours, and the airplanes are yours. Never mind the fact that you don't know how to run any of these things, but they're yours. And you win, and you get to go to heaven and get your 72 virgins. Just think about that, by the way. 72 virgins. Who does that appeal to? It appeals to people that have never had sex before. It appeals to these man children that they raise in Arab countries, who have been sodomized in many cases, brutalized in virtually every case by older male relatives. And everything in the Islamic vision of heaven is Las Vegas. Women, alcohol, lots of food, comfy cushions, gambling, music, fun. That's Muslim heaven, and it's also Las Vegas. So in any event, we're going to keep doing this, and we're going to keep eroding these values, and then they're going to do what they always have done. They are going to assume, rightfully, not correctly, but reasonably, they are going to assume reasonably enough that we are as weak and self-hating as the elitists in the BBC say that we are. And that's going to motivate them to do something really big. And I thought 9/11 was enough to convince people. I was convinced before 9/11, but if 9/11 didn't do it, I thought, my God, the sight of watching those two towers coming down, that's not enough to convince you we have a bit of a problem here? Apparently not. As always, we're victims of our own success. Our intelligence services have foiled at least 12 attacks on the scale of 9/11. Since they didn't happen, they didn't happen. Since they didn't happen, people think, well, there's nothing to worry about. And every single day out there right now on the line, there are soldiers and sailors and airmen, Marine and Coast Guardsmen and women out there right now who are risking their lives so that we can be as stupid as we are here. And it's not much of a problem, really. We don't have to worry about it. Let's just not offend people, because that's the main thing. We have to worry more about our cocktail parties than we do against our survival. But one of these days, they're going to do something. They're going to do something big, and it's going to be big enough to get our attention. The Japanese thought that the fat, stupid, lazy Americans, if given enough of a push by sinking their Pacific fleet, would retreat to the west coast of the United States, and Japan would have the Asian co-prosperity sphere. They'd have the entire Pacific Ocean. And that was their calculation. If we destroy the American fleet, they'll essentially surrender. They'll deal with them. We're not going to try and conquer America. The Japanese never tried to conquer America. Basically what they said, though, is if we can sink their fleet, Americans are so weak and so lazy that they'll just give up the Pacific. Well, that was the calculation, and on December 7th, on a Sunday morning, when people were either sleeping or at church, no one's at battle stations, no one's on alert. That would have been war, and that would have been different. It was a sneak attack. It was something that in our culture we consider dishonorable. to the nth degree. And so on December 8th, they started to get the message. Now, the Japanese went down for 6 months without a single defeat. They just ran rampant in the Philippines and Wake and Guam and all, just everywhere they went, they just won. And then finally they began to realize that maybe they're dealing with something else, because Midway came in 42. But before Midway, and the reason for Midway is because 6 months or 5 or 6 months after Pearl Harbor, a group of Americans led by a guy named Jimmy Doolittle decided that it was important to hit Japan back, and right away. Not just for our own morale, although God knows it contributed to that. We need to hit them back right away so that they know that this is not going to be as easy as they think it is. It's not like they gave him a warning. They just wanted him to know. It's just what it was. So Jimmy Doolittle, and I want to say 26 other crews, might have been some different numbers close to that, do something has never been done before. They launch bombers off of an aircraft carrier. Never been tried. They're leaving the machine guns out, all of the defensive weapons on these B-25s. They're just stripping it to the bone. There's nothing on there except for a few bombs, because these things are going to have to take off from a deck. And in those days, all of them were lined up on the deck, so the person who's in the front of the line has about half the deck to get airborne. The first plane off the deck was the Ruptured Duck, and it was piloted by Jimmy Doolittle. And that plane took off into a storm, into an absolute storm. The deck is pitching like this. He had to time it, otherwise he's going to pitch himself into the ocean. He had to time it, and off they go. And they all get up in the air. They form up. They go to their separate targets, and they had all expected. This is the point I'm trying to make here, believe it or not. The Americans, when they signed up for this duty, had been told that they would hit various Japanese targets, and then they would fly on to China, which was occupied by the Japanese, but that the Chinese people were friendly to the Americans because of the Japanese occupation, and they would find a way to get them back home. But they're going to hit Japan and then fly and land in China. Well, as it turns out, they're on this mission in this storm, and they encounter, by sheer accident, a Japanese fishing vessel with antennas on it, which means that fishing vessel had the ability to warn the Japanese that this invasion was coming. And they got warned, 8 hours, 300 miles before they were supposed to launch. They knew that there was now a chance that the Japanese know this is coming, and we've got to make a decision. And so all of these people who were told that they would be able to land in China, who volunteered for the job, were now told, we're so far away from Japan now, so much further than we thought we would be. We've got the fuel to get to Japan. We've got the fuel to get to our targets. Most of us will not have the fuel to get to China. We're either going to have to ditch in the sea, in the North China Sea, or we're going to have to land in Japan and most likely be executed. So whoever you don't want to go under these conditions, raise your hand. And nobody raised their hand, not one of them. Not one of these Doolittle raiders raised their hands. As a matter of fact, they took some backup people with them because they expected some people to go down because of sickness or disease, or maybe they get cold feet. And what you found was that the guys who were on the backup crews were offering the flight crews $500, which was an unbelievably large amount of money in those days, especially if you're a junior airman in the Army Air Corps. The backup crews were offering the guys on the airplanes $500-600 to trade places with them to let them get on board that aircraft. And those aircraft took off and they hit Japan. Didn't do any damage, but they dropped bombs on Japan. They dropped bombs on the emperor and damaged a school or something like that. And some of them made it to China, some of them ditched in the ocean, some of them landed in Japan. I think one crew might have been held prisoner. Certainly one crew was executed, just chopped off their heads with samurai swords and so on. And they knew this was going to happen when they went. But they did it. And if they hadn't done it, then the Japanese would have avoided the catastrophe at Midway. The Japanese sailed out to the Battle of Midway because it was intolerable to Admiral Yamamoto that these American swine could possibly drop a bomb on the sacred soil of Japan. They'd been promised that would never happen. So Yamamoto basically pulls together the Japanese fleet and says, we're going to stop this from happening. He heads out to Midway to intercept the American fleet, and we can read their messages, and they can't read ours. And in the space of 6 or 7 minutes, we sink 3 of their aircraft carriers, and the war's over in 7 minutes. because of the suicidal bravery of the torpedo squadron. I could tell that story all day. But in any event, I tell you this long-winded story just to say this: they will make this calculation again, and they will get us to the point where we're all the way angry, and then things will get very different. They'll get very different, and I don't want that to happen, and you don't either. So, the BBC and CNN are doing their level best to weaken the morale of the West in the belief that if we just eliminate these nationalists, people who believe, forget nationalists, I should have said patriots. If we eliminate these British patriots and these American patriots and these Canadian patriots, German, French patriots, if we eliminate them, then the world government will be nothing to worry about. I think that's why Merkel let all these people in, because she wants to devalue German nationalism, German patriotism, national identity, not nationalism. So that's what they do. They're going to get us all killed. Well, actually, they're going to get them all killed. We'll do what we've done before. We will step up, and we will find reserves of courage and strength in this population that they simply cannot imagine. And I know this to be true because of what happened on Flight 93. I also know it to be true because when we sent our troops to fight them in Afghanistan and then Iraq, the internal communications of al-Qaeda, not what they were saying to the idiots in the press, their internal communications were saying basically al-Zawahiri in Iraq was telling Osama bin Laden, send us all the men you've got. These Americans are not the Americans that you told us we were going to get. These aren't the hippie liberal kids. These kids are kicking our ass. And we're getting slaughtered. We're being killed 70-1 in our own backyards in Fallujah. And so Osama sends more and more warriors to Iraq, and more of these al-Qaeda suicide bombers are killed by U.S. forces in the desert and not in malls in Disneyland in America. So they'll make a mistake again like that. But if it weren't for the BBC and CNN and the rest of these, we wouldn't have to have that fight. We wouldn't have to kill those people. We wouldn't have to, because we would make it clear to them that we are willing to defend this civilization. We are, but there's no way for anybody overseas to know that, is there really? Except for them to find out the hard way, and for us to find out the hard way, and have other Okinawas and Iwos and Normandys and all the rest. So we have to fight against this voice of suicide and defeat in order to save our lives and their lives. But it's not our job to save their lives, but we would save thousands, hundreds of thousands, probably million of their lives if we made it clear that you will not get away with this. If we did something that didn't kill a single Muslim person, didn't kill one of them, if it did not actually physically harm a single Muslim individual, but if we bury the dead with pig's parts, if we show them that every bullet that we are firing at them is covered in pig grease and it is going to deny you your ticket to heaven, which is what you're fighting for in the first place, if we did that, we would save actual Muslim lives, large numbers of them, and we'd save a lot of American lives too, which is what I really care about. So there we go. BBC is going to try and kill us all. I should have said try to kill us all. They're not going to succeed, but they want to. And they want to because it makes them look good at cocktail parties, and the only thing they're allowed to compete with is who's the most virtuous show-off. So we'll hire speech impediment people. That ought to show those savages in America, those Donald Trump supporters, how unbelievably better we are than them morally. We're going to give you people around the world listening to our service. You're not going to be able to understand what the service is saying because we'll show you, rather than have you get the news in a way that's easy to understand with somebody who can read it without a speech impediment, we're going to show you how unbelievably morally advanced we are by essentially destroying our mission, which is to bring the news around the world. So that's all you need to know about these people. Anyway, that'll do it for today. This show is brought to you, and all of these thoughts and everything come from me from upstairs somehow. I don't know how it works. I sometimes, after I'm finished with one of these rants, I go back and look at it to find out what I said. But in any event, these messages need to be heard by people, and this message that you're hearing right now is paid for by a very, very, very small number of the total people who get this message. And if that's alarming to you, and it's alarming to me, then you can go to billwhittle.com and click the button that says become a member, and we will charge you 33 cents a day until you tell us to stop. And I don't know. What's civilization worth to you? It's worth that much to me. In any event, uh, we'd love to have you. And the people that do join say it's the best money they spent. And I happen to agree with them. That'll do it for Bill Whittle Live today on Thursday, the 23rd of March. We'll do another show tomorrow, and then next week we may have to reduce to once or twice a week because we want to get some guests in here and do some interviews, and that means booking one person or two people every single day that's an army. It's an army to do that. So that'll do it. We will see you guys tomorrow. There it is. All right, thanks for joining us. And by the way, as the show as we know it now is starting to wind down, I just want to tell you that none of this would be possible. None of it would be possible without our incredible producer, Neil, who sits over there. He sits there, comes in last minute. He prepares all of the live feeds, sets up the 2 live feeds. He's the most competent, capable person I've ever worked with. And you don't know him, and that's okay. And that's kind of how he wants it. But we couldn't do any of it without him. None of it. So that'll do it for today, and we'll see you tomorrow. And push the button there, hero.